What's up, guys? Eric Codes here. We're going to talk today. Hopefully, sound is a little better on this video. I can't really control the wind, and I do this from my phone, so hopefully you guys can hear me. But today we're going to talk about what the best language to learn if you are a web developer is, and I'm going to cut right to the chase. I think it's PHP. All right, and a couple reasons for that, and we'll get into those. But for those of us out there who have been told JavaScript's the way to go, definitely a good way, definitely useful. I use JavaScript every day of my life. Whenever I am working either in my side business or for my full-time, JavaScript is used every single day. However, PHP is used more. And that's because if you're confused on if you're just getting started and you're confused, then you're like, you do your research online and people are like, don't learn PHP, or they say PHP is dying. They'll say, JavaScript's great because it's one language to learn on both sides. C# is best because, you can do anything with it. I think all those things are nuggets of truth, but they don't paint the whole picture. And unfortunately, in the world of coding, we have fanboys, people who are communities, right, that are just solely focused on their way is the best way, and it's what needs to be done. So let's unpack a little bit why I think PHP is the best coding language to learn. And I think there's a big asterisk next to that. If you are a web developer, this is important, okay? Because if you want to be a software developer, don't learn PHP. It's not going to be useful for you, okay? PHP is a web-based server-side language, and that's what it's used for, and that's what it's best at. So, very important for you to know that if you want to be a web developer, PHP is the best language for you to learn. And JavaScript this year, you got to learn them both. So, but the big difference is the front end and the back end. So let's unpack all of that. So I guess we'll start with front end versus back end, maybe, or why JavaScript is so popular. Let's start with why JavaScript is so popular as a first language, right? First of all, the JavaScript community is very active. There's a lot of people, especially over the last few years, who were very excited to get involved in coding, especially from like the late 2010s to the early 2020s. And they were all very excited because there was one language. It was the release of Node.js. And what Node.js meant was that now JavaScript wasn't just a front-end language. It could also be used in the back end, okay? So first-time coders or coders that are looking to get into it or just starting out, okay? Front end versus back end. What's the difference there? Front end means the user interface, what you see and what the person who is at the web page or using the software is able to see and interact with. That's front end code. Back end code, in a nutshell, is doing logic on the back end, working with a database and that sort of thing. So, for instance, on your simple web page, let's take Facebook. Let's take Facebook as an example. And don't quote me on this because I don't know exactly what Facebook is using or any of those things, but let's just say, to make this easy to understand. Say you go on your Facebook page, okay? You have your main page, right? Not like your home screen, but just your main page where people can come and look at your details, things people posted on your wall, all that different stuff. So the way this works is that when you hit that URL in the browser, that URL is actually taking data either from a GET or a POST request. Most likely in Facebook it's probably a GET request, I'm not sure. But somewhere in that URL, there's going to be like an ID, right? It could be 6 numbers long, whatever it is. And that ID corresponds to your information in Facebook's database, okay? So let's say the number is 123. And let's say my profile is number 123. So when the URL is visited, it would say, facebook.com/profile ? ID equals 123. what you can do is you can get the information from that URL. And it says, okay, ID is 123. Let's go and find 123 in the database, pull all of this person's data, and then place it on the screen where they've called for it, okay? So that is how your typical HTTP request is sent. Now, JavaScript originally was only in the front end, meaning it was only in the browser, and still is the only language in the browser. So again, that's why I stress, if you want to develop any JavaScript, you won't. And I can understand why people say just learn JavaScript, because they can also use Node.js. Here's the thing. The languages are pretty similar. They're both C-based languages, where they use curly braces and loops the same way. So PHP is a lot easier to use on the back end. But again, we're not there yet, so let's keep going. Let's keep unpacking this. So JavaScript is the language of the browser, which means if you want to click on a button and show something on the screen, that happens in JavaScript. Like you say, okay, when the user clicks this button, let's change the background blue. And it's something that every beginning coder kind of gets used to. Like, okay, grab the thing that we want to click on it, and turn something else a color. Great, that's how JavaScript works. However, again, that's only useful on the front end. You need persisting data. Now, there's data storage in the browser, which is like your local sessions, your local storage, which you can use in the browser, that's fine. But it's definitely better served using a database. So typically what would happen is if you needed to click on something and get information in that same page, JavaScript would send a request, just like we talked about before, right, to an API. And the API is server-side code that says, okay, what do they want? It takes something from either the post, which you can't see in the URL, or the get, which you can see in the URL. And it says, whatever that get is, whatever that post variable is, let's search for that in the database. So in our example, again, it looked for 123 is the user ID. In the database, it said, find ID 123, grab the name, how many friends they have, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is that they're that they need to show on the page, right? All that information is gotten, and then it's sent back. So if JavaScript can do that and say to the API, give me this stuff, it waits for it to come back, and then it shows it in the screen. That's how JavaScript has worked for most of the time in its existence. I mean, it's gotten a lot better, but that's the idea, right? And the API typically used to be written in PHP. So PHP was the server side that was getting the data from the database and returning all that stuff. So again, now with Node.js, you can use the same language on the back end. But here's the caveat. Here's why I still wouldn't say JavaScript is the best web-based language. And that's because it's not as easy as it is to do in PHP. PHP has been in existence, I think, since 1994 and 1995. And it's always been a server-side language. So the way things work when you request a PHP file is all the stuff we talked about with the API. That all happens, but it all happens in the very first time you send a request, right? Does that lookup, finds everything, and the way PHP works is there's things called PHP tags. It's a open bracket, question mark, letters PHP. And that opens up the ability to write server-side code. And in that, you can say, get from the database all the stuff that we want for this person's profile, right? Get all that stuff. And then we're going to close that PHP tag. So all of our logic is done. And then when we show the page, we use typical HTML, right? Stuff that you're probably, if you're watching this video, you're probably used to using all the time. So you have your typical HTML where you would, let's say it's an H1 tag, right? You want to say, welcome, whoever's name it is, right? So for me, it'd be, welcome, Eric. That's what we wanted to do. When we get to the H1, inside the H1 tag, instead of writing Eric and hard coding it, we would say, welcome, open up the PHP tags, and put the variable. Say we put the variable as name. We set it to name. Welcome, first name, right? What happens is PHP does all the logic when the request is sent, and then it sends that information back to your browser as HTML. So then everything else gets rendered out. So that's how PHP is working, okay? So a lot of APIs are gonna be written in PHP, and that's why, like, if you want to get refreshed, like you wanna get more current data, you have to refresh the page, right? You have to refresh the page because it needs to load all this stuff. It's told it's a server-side language, so to get the new information, the page needs to preload. And that's why I think, like React and these other frameworks, I mean, there's other reasons for it, but why JavaScript got so popular, because JavaScript is in the browser and it can continually, you can set a timeout, say every minute, let's send another request to the, while we're on the page, send another request to the API and have it send us back the most up-to-date information. So you can do that, but the thing is, if you're sending all these requests all the time, it's going to slow down your server. So that's kind of like, in a nutshell, the difference between PHP and JavaScript, right? So there are different languages. They're both C-based languages, which means they use curly braces, to separate things. The big thing with, the big differences are how you declare a variable. In PHP, you use a $sign and put the name of your variable. Whereas in JavaScript, there's a couple of ways. There's const, there's let, and there's var, which you shouldn't use, but you might see it in your code. So const, let, var is the way that you start declaring a variable in JavaScript. Okay, so we need JavaScript if we want to click on a button and send an API, so you're going to need it. But why not follow that through? Because we already learned one language. Why not just use that on the server side, right? Screw learning PHP and just use JavaScript. Okay, that's where I was. That's what I thought, right? So here's the problem with that. It's much more complicated to do it. Even though it's not that complicated, but it's more complicated than PHP. And here's a couple reasons why. The first reason is that PHP is already set up to be a server side, right? You don't need Node.js. You don't need all these different packages, right? Like, so you don't need Express to handle the routing. You don't need CD Express to handle the routing. You don't need something like Handlebars or Pug or EJS to render out the variables, right? Like, you don't need that as another package. There's not all these packages that you need to install and keep up on, right? So if there's an update released to a package that breaks something, all your code is broken, right? And there's a ton of packages and a ton of dependencies. I remember hearing a story once about there was some little package that was old and all these other packages were built on it. And this guy, I don't know if he got mad about not getting money or getting recognition or whatever it was, but he basically took the package down, and then all these big packages got broken, and all these websites were broken from that. So it's a dependency on dependency on dependency. I don't know about you, but for me, I don't like depending on somebody else to do my code. I just don't. So again, it's much simpler to just get it set up. All you have to do is install PHP, and it's there. You have everything at your disposal. You can do exactly what we talked about, like doing things out and that sort of thing. So that's a big part of it being easier. Number two, web hosting. So if you want to be a web developer, you're going to have to put websites on the internet so people can find them. Most of your websites are going to be simple websites. They're not going to be like these big enterprise things. Some of them might be, and in which case, if you feel the need, you can use something like Laravel, which is a PHP package, which is a PHP framework, much like a React, but React is JavaScript and on the front end, and Laravel is mostly back end. It does have some front end stuff, but it's not quite front end. Anyways, getting off on a tangent. But if you want enterprise level stuff, there is a thing to do with Laravel. You can use Laravel framework, but most of the websites you're going to do, especially if you're like a freelancer, are going to be simple PHP or WordPress sites. Get out of your head right now that like, oh, WordPress sucks. Oh, guys, WordPress, that's what people want, and it makes you money. So no pride here. Like, you could still be a full-on badass web developer and use WordPress, okay? Because the way that you're going to learn how to use WordPress isn't, I'm going to go and get someone's theme and change colors. Like, no, you actually make all the themes and you make the plugins. Like, very, very different experience. But anyways, so you have PHP. PHP is already on the big hosting sites, and so is WordPress, right? So let's just name a few: GoDaddy, Bluehost. Neither one of them I like, but they're big. GoDaddy, Bluehost, Hostinger, which is my favorite. Not sponsored or anything like that, but love Hostinger. HostGator, SiteGrounds, right? All these different big time hosting platforms already have PHP installed, and they already have WordPress installed. So right then and there, it's already making things easier. You don't have to have knowledge of how to customize your server so that it can run Node.js instead of the different ports where the front end and the back end run on two different ports. And, you know, like, it's just so much easier and cheaper. That's the other thing, it's cheaper. You know, like, I've done it before too, where like I spin up a droplet on DigitalOcean, you know, which is basically a virtual machine, which again, some of this stuff might be over, if you're a real beginner, it might be over your head of what we're talking about. But a virtual machine is basically a computer with whatever operating system you want to put on it. That's like a virtual computer. So like you spin it up inside of another computer. So it's a computer within a computer basically, but it's not like an actual physical computer. It's a digital, you know, virtual computer. So, you know, for me to get Node.js going, I got to get the database. I got to get a MySQL database installed or a NoSQL database installed. And that's another thing we can hit on here. So you got to get some sort of database installed on it. Then you need to install Node.js on it. Then you need to separate out the ports, the front end and the back end, set those up. And then once that's up and going, okay, now your website's up. Whereas with PHP and a host, like one of those big time hosts that take care of all this stuff for you, all you gotta do is drag your files in and drop them into the public HTML folder and website's up. You choose which one you like better, okay? So that's another plus. Also, you heard me say MySQL before. PHP and MySQL, they best friends, right? They're peanut butter and jelly. They go together. You know, as Forrest Gump would say, like peas and carrots. Okay, they are meant to work together. They were built that way. So, at least PHP was built that way. So again, you know, if you're, I'm not a huge fan personally of NoSQL databases, like the MongoDBs and that sort of thing. They're great because I think that they're easier. I don't even want to say if they're easier to learn, because they're not. They're easier to, there's not as many rules, okay? With the MySQL database, there are rules. It's a relational database, right? Which means this table is connected to this table, and we have to connect them a certain way to make sure we get the right data that we need. Whereas NoSQL, you just kind of push the data in, which is nice, but it's also kind of scary because, like, what if there's some sort of data that's missing that you actually need? And then to do that, you have to build schemas. And when you build those schemas, it's now becoming more confusing, whereas MySQL's already done it, right? You get what's called the LAMP stack, or I would say XAMPP if you're a Windows user, but it already has a database, it already has MySQL installed, it already has PHP installed, it already has the PHP MyAdmin, which is a way to look at the database installed. It's download it, install it, it works. Okay, so a lot easier. So again, that'd be reason number 2. And I guess the third and final reason we'll go over is that's where the jobs are. Look, do me a favor. You're watching this video, open up a new tab. Search what percentage of websites are done using PHP or use PHP. You're gonna see it's somewhere between 75 and 80%, depending on the search that you get and what source you get. 3 out of 4 websites are using PHP. If you are a web developer and you need a job, which language do you think you would want to have a better chance of getting a job in? The one with the 75%, or I think Node.js last time I looked it up was like maybe between 2 and 3%. You're gonna fight all these people coming out of a boot camp that taught the MERN stack, right? So you're gonna fight all these hundreds of thousands of boot camp graduates that know the same exact shit as you. You know, you're gonna go with that and fight over the measly 2%, or you take a little time to learn PHP, because what you learned for JavaScript is great. You're gonna use that, trust me. But a little bit of PHP, because you already have the JavaScript knowledge and how back end works. You learn PHP, now you're in a much bigger pool. You know, I don't know. I like my chances with 75% versus 2%. So having my third reason, I was like, PHP is the language to learn. Again, it's so much better and so easy to integrate. It's the learning curve of it is so little. And if you're afraid because you're like, well, that's a whole other language I have to learn. Well, SQL's another language you have to learn, right? Who knows where the world is gonna go with coding languages, you know? There could be a new sort of thing. I mean, like a TypeScript. TypeScript is an evolution of JavaScript. Just because you learn JavaScript doesn't necessarily mean you know TypeScript, right? There's a learning curve there too. So, it's just basically JavaScript with types, but still, you gotta understand what types are, and you gotta understand, how you can throw errors and all those different things once you move over to TypeScript. So, again, you're gonna be learning. This is a job that you signed up for a lifetime of learning, okay? It's not a job where you learn the skill, right? And then it's all you're willing to know, right? Like, it's constantly evolving and changing. And there's no possible way that you can just not continue to learn, because you won't make it. Other people will learn and leave you in the dust, okay? So, again, like I'm saying, the most important thing is that you know right now, at the very beginning, you're gonna have to continue to learn, right? And don't be scared to learn another language. And the reason for that is pretty much all coding languages work the same, right? A loop in JavaScript is pretty much the same, right? Maybe a little different syntax, like we talked about, declaring variables, that sort of thing, but it's pretty much the same thing as a loop in PHP, which is pretty much the same thing as a loop in C#, right? Like, they all work the same. Like, if it's a for loop, right? You set use the word for, right? You set the counter, then you say how long you want the for loop to run for, right? If it's longer than the length of an array, or the same, the length of the array, and then you increase the counter and then write your code. Same thing. Every language is the same thing. Syntax is a little bit different, but it's easy enough, especially today with things like ChatGPT and AI. They're going to help you along much faster. You could say, okay, this is what I want to, you could even say, this is what I want to do in JavaScript. Give it to the AI and say, can you please rewrite this in PHP? Yeah, I guarantee you it'll do it just fine, because the AI can understand the logic and it knows the syntax, so it'll throw it right back out. Again, I would recommend going through and learning it, but if you needed to, you could do it that way. All right. So again, I think you shouldn't be scared about about learning a new language, because it's going to be your career. You're always going to have to learn a new language. And the good news is they're all basically the same. Okay. So let's wrap this all up and say, like, I think PHP, if you want to be a web developer, is the language to learn. It's going to be the one that's going to be most useful. It's going to be the one that's the most jobs. Again, if you're a freelance, you're going to use it all the time with things like WordPress. WordPress is written in PHP. Okay. So for those reasons, I think it's the best language to learn for a web developer. Now, JavaScript, you are going to need JavaScript. But most of the time, for the things that you're going to build, you're not going to be building a calendar for somebody to use. You're going to be making a web page. There's information. You're going to have about a contact page with a form, which is all handled in PHP. Like, all that stuff is going to be done much easier in PHP. So just embrace it. Don't listen to people online that are like, because I was the same way. I was like, oh, PHP is dead. I'm not going to use it. It's lame. It's old PHP. Wrong. PHP is great. And it's everything that you pretty much need built right into the language. It integrates seamlessly with SQL. I don't know what to tell you. If this doesn't convince you, you're not going to be convinced, all right? And I'm not trying to convince you. I'm just trying to tell you what, from my experience, coming from the JavaScript world, going to a JavaScript boot camp, and now being a PHP developer and a web developer on the side. So I own my own business, and I do it for a 9 to 5. I use PHP much more than I use JavaScript to do any sort of like server-side stuff. And that's what people want. They want to have a profile. They want you to remember their stuff. They want to be able to come into place and place orders and all those things. You need a database. No database means you're just front end. It can be very limited jobs. So I recommend you go out, you learn yourself PHP, and get yourself a job. Get in the industry, man. And if you can't find a job, do it on the side. Do it as a side business. Start your own business. PHP is going to serve you well. So again, that's my thoughts for today. Eric Codes. Again, if you liked the video, give me a like or follow. You can also follow my podcast. It's the PH Podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts right now. Check it out. Let me know if you like it. Leave something in the comment section. Stuff you'd like me to talk about, because I can talk all day on my walk. So, all right, everyone, take it easy. Again, this is Eric Codes. See ya.